Justice Merrick Harod, a teenager from Florida, USA, mysteriously disappeared after school. The police had to unravel a complex case, and the deeper they delved into the details, motives, and chilling scenarios played out by the criminals, the more horrified they became by the cynicism and cold-bloodedness with which the killer committed one of the most brutal crimes in the county's history. Friday, April 13, 2018, turned out to be a truly ominous day, becoming the day of a tragedy that made law enforcement officers in the state work hard. It had been only 3 weeks since Justice Harod's 16th birthday. That day, she was going to school and then planned to spend time with friends. That morning, the girl woke up later than usual, already late for the bus that picked her up from the stop. Her 37-year-old mother, Danelle, was busy getting her 5-year-old daughter ready for kindergarten, so she couldn't help her older daughter get to the educational institution. According to Danelle, Justice went to school on foot. In the evening, she was supposed to return from school by bus, as always. At the appointed time, the girl did not appear at home. At first, her family was not worried, because Justice had a lot of friends, and she often stayed with one of them after classes. But time passed, and she still wasn't there. At home, they also weren't too concerned, knowing that their daughter could stay overnight at her best friend's house. The parents had to get up early for work, so they went to bed without waiting for her. But even the next morning, the girl's bed was empty, and her mother, losing patience, felt anxiety and concern for her child. Danelle couldn't get through to her daughter, so she turned to the police. Law enforcement officers accepted the missing person report and got to work. Detectives began working on versions regarding Justice's whereabouts. They were used to teenagers often disappearing, being able to stay with friends for several days, but usually returning. However, the girl's mother felt that something was wrong because her daughter was not getting in touch at all, which caused alarm. Unlike typical cases, law enforcement officials didn't wait for news from the missing girl and immediately began searching. Investigators wondered if the girl could have simply run away. According to her loved ones, there had indeed been some changes in her behavior over the past few months, which are traditionally difficult for teenagers. Justice's family had moved to the small town of Sorrento, Florida, with a population of less than 1,000 people. It has a warm, mild climate and picturesque nature. The girl changed schools, and considering that she was a high school student in the middle of the school year, this could indeed create certain difficulties. In such situations, typical teenagers often lose control, run away to friends, going through difficult times. Justice could have also stayed with friends for the weekend after classes on Friday. However, the girl's mother denied any such assumptions. Justice was mature, responsible, helped her with her younger daughter, and could not just disappear without warning. Sometimes it seemed that she was even too mature for her young age. There was no reason to run away from loved ones or problems, because she was used to facing them head-on, and she always discussed difficulties with her mother. Besides, all her things remained at home. Danelle insisted that some misfortune could have happened to her daughter, and it was necessary to start searching immediately. Despite the assurances of law enforcement officers, Danelle was getting more and more worried. Her daughter had never kept bad company. Attempts to run away or avoid problems were uncharacteristic of her. Even if she had stayed with friends, she would definitely have called her parents and let them know. However, the missing girl remained silent, ignoring any calls and messages, including on social networks. The girl was friendly and sociable, did not use prohibited substances or alcohol. To assume that she decided to leave without warning anyone was simply absurd. The police checked the database for the missing teenager and confirmed the mother's words, she really did not appear in the criminal reports. Justice had also not been involved in any accidents. Law enforcement officers began searching for the girl, talking to all her friends, interviewing dozens of teenagers, classmates, and companions. Because of this, many rumors spread on social networks. Schoolchildren retold Justice's story in different ways. Some claimed that they saw her sleeping on the graves of the cemetery, others, that she had moved to her secret boyfriend. Most of this information was fictitious. Young men and girls made up the most incredible lies for selfish reasons, just to gain more popularity at school and attract attention to themselves. In fact, she did not have a boyfriend, and she never had a habit of wandering around the cemetery before. Another part of the teenagers who sincerely loved and valued the missing girl began to counter the spreaders of rumors. They exposed these speculations and repeatedly attacked the most ardent gossipmongers. Because of this, one of the girls was even suspended from classes for the period of the investigation at school. The rumors of Raisa Shedchev not only outraged the parents of the children but also the entire town. The public was indignant and tried to help in the search, but to no avail. Despite the obstacles, law enforcement officers managed to narrow down the circle of suspects and persons closest to the missing girl to a reasonable number. It included the girl's closest school friends, who were interrogated first. The police hoped in this way to find the young beauty safe and sound. However, what they found out not only radically changed the direction of their work but also allowed them to track down one of the most bloodthirsty villains that experienced detectives had ever encountered. Law enforcement officers spoke with all the girl's acquaintances, as well as interviewed teachers and classmates. Investigators established that she never showed up at school that Friday morning, that is, she disappeared in the morning. A check of video surveillance recordings along Justice's route and the geolocation of her phone showed that she did indeed leave the house around 7:25 a.m. and set off for school. But the girl disappeared approximately within a half-hour interval on the way to the educational institution. What happened to Justice on the way? For days after the disappearance of young Justice, on April 17, a man turned to the police department. While doing his morning jog, he noticed an unpleasant odor coming from the side of the trail. Intrigued, he turned towards the forest. Having walked only a few meters, the athlete came across a human body. The man did not touch anything or trample the traces at the crime scene but immediately called the 911 emergency service. Police officers arrived at the scene of the gruesome discovery and found a female body with signs of severe decomposition. The slight participation of animals and the hot, humid weather was noticeable. The main mass of damaged tissues was formed as a result of the influence of some chemical substance. Forensic experts found out that it was something like bleach, which was poured over the victim's body, obviously to hide traces and evidence. It was not possible to identify the deceased at the crime scene. Laboratory analysis was needed for this. However, the investigators assumed that this was the missing Justice they had been so persistently searching for. The entire upper part of the body was disfigured by chemical burns. Even in this state, it was obvious that the girl did not die of natural causes. The police were able to confirm that they had Justice in front of them only after DNA analysis. Her final resting place was a wooded area near the town of DeLand, located about half an hour's drive from Sorrento, where she lived. The upper part of the body was so severely decomposed that the bones were exposed. The lower half was partially preserved thanks to the pants and shoes. In addition, there was possibly less chemical substance here, so the skin was not so badly burned. Due to the poor condition of the body, the exact cause of Justice's death could not be established, but strangulation seemed most likely. The attacker pulled the girl's pants down to her ankles and pulled her t-shirt up to her back, suggesting violence. Unfortunately, the bleach destroyed most of the traces, so this motive could not be proven. It was obvious that the victim had received several strong blows to the face, as her nose was broken in several places. The police interrogated the jogger who discovered the gruesome find and called 911. He was able to provide valuable information. According to the man, when he was running near the body on the trail back on the 16th, he noticed another person in that place from afar. According to the witness, it was a man, but he could not say more, because the noise of the approaching athlete startled the criminal, and he fled. The jogger found the stranger's reaction strange, so he remembered this incident, but that day he did not approach closer and did not see the body, doing it only the next day. The jogger himself turned out to be uninvolved in what happened, which was also verified by the investigation. He successfully passed a polygraph test and had an alibi for the day of Justice's disappearance. To obtain new information, the detectives carefully studied the video surveillance recordings along Justice's entire route, including at the nearest stop where the teenager was supposed to get on the bus. According to the girl's mother, she went to school on her own, but soon the police found out that this was a lie. In fact, that morning, Justice's stepfather, Robert, agreed to drive the schoolgirl to the educational institution. He was just about to go to work, where he moonlighted as a carpenter, and was driving a work car. Recently, the man had problems with work, he could not get a permanent position. The detectives could not understand why the mother had lied about how her daughter had gotten to school. Therefore, the investigators decided to talk to the victim's mother more thoroughly. This time she changed her version and confirmed that her daughter had not gone alone. Robert had agreed to take Justice to school in his car. The woman explained her lie by the fact that Robert's driver's license had been suspended. She was afraid that he would be punished if she immediately told the police the truth. This happened at a time when everyone was still hoping to find the girl alive and unharmed. The woman was sure that her little lie would not interfere with the search for her daughter in any way. Unfortunately, there were a lot of such deceptions in this case, so the investigation had to make a lot of efforts to restore the true picture of events. After that, the detectives requested the school's video surveillance recordings directed at the parking lot. This is where the stepfather with Justice should have stopped if he really drove the teenager to school. The bus that brought the children to school and which the girl was late for also stopped at this place. Oddly enough, just at the time interval when the main figures of this investigation were supposed to get into the camera's lenses, a malfunction occurred. The recording was not conducted. Therefore, it was impossible to determine whether the stepfather had dropped off Justice. However, dozens of witnesses claimed that the girl never showed up at school that day, no one saw her, so there were doubts whether the stepfather had come to school at all. In any case, the last person to see the murdered girl alive was Robert, the lover of Justice's mother. And only he could know what happened. Law enforcement officers called Robert in for questioning but did not put any pressure on him. Eventually, he began to talk. On April 29, the man admitted that he had not taken Justice to school after all. Instead, at her own request, he gave the girl a ride to a neighboring town and dropped her off at the entrance so that she could meet with some friend of hers. According to Robert, his stepdaughter begged him to do this. He assumed that it was her secret boyfriend, whom she had not told anyone about, not even her mother. So the man gave in to the girl's persuasion in order to improve relations with her and gain her trust. According to the stepfather, he did not ask Justice for details, since he had only recently started dating her mother and wanted to please the teenager in order to be able to continue this relationship. However, Robert did not know either the name or any details about the friend she was supposed to meet. The stepdaughter assured him that she would get to school on her own and planned to return by bus. Therefore, he was not worried about her. The man himself could not wait for the girl, because he had to go to his shift as a handyman in Volusia County. He simply did not have time for this. This turn of events stunned the police. Neither of the parents had any idea about this mysterious stranger Justice was allegedly dating. It was quite possible that he was the last one to see the girl alive, or even somehow involved in what happened to her. However, neither the mother nor the stepfather could provide any valuable information on this matter. Then the detectives questioned the victim's friends again, and this helped them to come up with the first significant leads. Justice's closest girlfriends claimed that she did not have a boyfriend. However, they recalled that quite recently, the girl had started talking about some young man from the internet. She met him on social networks, and he actively showed interest in her, he wrote often, which Justice shared with her friends. However, the girl herself did not like the intrusiveness of this guy. Her friends doubted that she would go on a date with him. Investigators thoroughly checked the victim's social media pages. They analyzed the likes, comments, her new subscriptions, and correspondence. One profile particularly caught the attention of the detectives. For the last few months, an 18-year-old young man, whose avatar featured a muscular guy, had been actively communicating with Justice and constantly interacting with her posts. He openly flirted with the girl, suggested meeting, and showered her with compliments. Despite the fact that the stranger claimed to live nearby, the police could not find anyone resembling the photo among the victim's closest circle. None of Justice's friends recognized this young man either. Moreover, despite his persistent attempts to get acquainted, the girl never responded to his messages, she simply ignored them. Nevertheless, law enforcement officers were convinced that it was this social media profile that was the key to solving the crime. The detectives studied the page of the intrusive young man and the information from his account in detail. They managed to find out the phone number associated with the profile. It turned out that in reality, it did not belong to an 18-year-old boy at all, but to a middle-aged man named Robert Kern. It was none other than Justice's stepfather. The investigators were shocked, because during the first interrogation, this man had already aroused their distrust. They turned to Robert again, who had previously been so willing to cooperate. But now his position had changed dramatically, he refused to communicate with the police. However, law enforcement officers did not back down. Robert had already been caught in a lie, and now all the clues were pointing to him. He became the main suspect in the case of the murder of his underage stepdaughter. Despite his resistance, the police arrested Kern and thoroughly investigated his personality to understand if he could have committed this brutal crime. Of course, correspondence on social networks alone was not enough to accuse a person of murder. Moreover, by that time, Robert had almost become a member of the family, since he had been dating the victim's mother since last fall. He often stayed overnight at their place and had close contact with all the household members. At least until that moment, the investigation had no evidence of the stepfather's improper behavior towards the girl. And Justice herself did not tell anyone about this. During the interrogation, Robert denied his guilt in any harassment of his stepdaughter. He justified the correspondence on social networks as a failed joke, allegedly wanting to increase the girl's self-esteem in this way, who would be pleased to receive so much male attention. But this version sounded absolutely absurd. After all, Justice did not even respond to the young man who actively liked her photos and showered her with compliments, she simply ignored him and called him weird in conversations with her friends. To find evidence against the stepfather, the detectives decided to talk to the victim's best friend named Rachel. The girl said that recently she and Justice had become very close and often stayed overnight at each other's place. During one of these visits, Robert came to pick up his stepdaughter to take her home. He asked Rachel if everything was all right with Justice and when she was going to return, but this visit frightened the girl even more. After that, she did not go home but stayed the night with her friend. According to Rachel, for several months before the tragedy, Justice had been staying overnight at her place so often that it began to seem suspicious. It seemed that the girl was deliberately avoiding staying overnight in her own home. In recent months, the stepfather had been staying at their house somehow too often, perhaps it was his presence that so frightened the victim. Rachel recalled that a month before her death, her friend had spent almost all her time living with her. The girl also noted that Justice had become somewhat nervous. If earlier she was calm, now she shuddered at the slightest accidental touch. And she even hinted that she was afraid of her stepfather. During the interrogation, the best friend remembered that on the day of Justice's disappearance, she saw Robert. According to her, he looked creepy, had a terrible look, so frightening that Rachel involuntarily thought that she understood why Justice stayed overnight with her so often. True, the girl could not clearly formulate what exactly seemed so suspicious or scary to her in the stepfather's behavior. Despite the lack of a clear wording, the investigators realized that they were moving in the right direction. The detectives decided to delve deeper into the biography of the main suspect. They analyzed his dialogues on social networks and calls from his mobile phone. What law enforcement officers discovered caused them outright disgust. It turned out that Robert had a rich criminal experience, starting with 2 burglaries in the early 2000s. According to the history of his search queries over the past month, they managed to come across capable of depriving a person of consciousness, in particular. He even tried to purchase this tool, apparently, successfully. In addition, the criminal had been studying maps of the surrounding forests for a long time, obviously looking for the ideal place to hide the body. He was also interested in ways to destroy traces on the body, having learned about the bleach that was used to treat the victim's body. The detectives checked the geolocation data of the criminal's mobile phone on the day the girl disappeared. It turned out that he was not driving her to the bus stop, or to school, or dropping her off in the city to meet an unknown young man. In fact, the stepfather purposefully went to the forest, where the body of young Justice was later found. In this place, the mobile phone remained stationary for a long time. According to law enforcement officials, for about an hour. At first, Robert claimed that he was heading to work in Volusia County, but this was an outright lie. In fact, he brought his mistress's daughter to the forest, where he probably attacked her, killed her, and then engaged in concealing evidence. The collected evidence allowed for charges to be brought in the murder of underage Justice. Robert was kept in custody until the start of the trial. The exact motive of the criminal remained unclear. He did not voice it until the very end of the case, but the prosecution believed that it was a murder for the purpose of. Robert refused to testify in his own defense in court but never pleaded guilty. However, the prosecutors had enough evidence to accuse the man of committing this cruel crime. The defendant's tumultuous criminal past was announced at the court hearing. Robert was first arrested back in May 2001 in the state of New York on charges of fraud. Since then, he had been held in the Volusia County Jail without the right to bail. It was proven that in 1999, the man first violated the law by committing burglary, for which he received 18 months in prison. And just 3 years later, he committed another theft, for which he served a whole year. All the criminal's testimony turned out to be lies. He claimed that he had dropped Justice off at school early in the morning and also said that he worked as a carpenter. However, both statements were refuted. When the deception was revealed, Robert began to invent other excuses, but all this also turned out to be a complete lie designed to confuse the investigators. The detectives were able to accurately track the movements of the criminal and his victim, comparing all the time intervals. The data from his mobile phones and correspondence allowed them to conclude that he had been preparing for this crime for a long time. The prosecution believed that the girl had no chance of survival from the very beginning, since Robert desired her death. Particles of vegetation and soil characteristic of the place where the body was found were discovered in the criminal's car. This was despite his assurances that he had never been to that area. In fact, the man had visited there at least twice. Already after committing the brutal crime, he returned to the murder scene once more. At least his phone was recorded in that area for a short time on April 16. It was probably then that Robert arrived and doused the body with a chemical to cover his tracks. And at that moment, it seems, he was seen by the same jogger who later found the body. At the time of the crime, the defendant was 43 years old. The prosecution tried to prove that his attack was in nature. He purposefully kidnapped the teenager to rape her and brutally deal with her. The defendant had long had a lustful attraction to Justice, but she avoided him in every possible way, rarely appearing at home. Robert did not stop trying to take advantage of her, and one day he waited for the right occasion. He achieved his insidious intent by vilely taking the life of 16-year-old Justice. The girl's mother, shocked by the murder of her daughter by her cohabitant, testified against him. She claimed that it was Robert who dissuaded her from calling the police immediately after Justice's disappearance, convincing her that she was simply staying overnight with her friend Rachel. Then he asked her to lie, allegedly that the girl had gone to school on her own. At first, the woman did not understand the motives for this request. She thought that he was simply afraid of the consequences of driving without a license. After discussing the case materials, the jury reached a verdict in literally half an hour. In their opinion, Robert Kern was guilty of first-degree premeditated murder of a minor. He was sentenced to life imprisonment without the right to early release. In addition, the criminal received an additional 5 years in prison for trying to confuse the investigation. Throughout the entire process, he never pleaded guilty, showed no remorse for what he had done. Despite the obvious evidence, until the very last moment, he insisted on his innocence and accused the authorities of arbitrariness. In the small town of Ladowicite, Georgia, a strange event occurred in December 2007, a single mother vanished without a trace. When investigators arrived at her trailer, they found no signs of struggle or violence. It seemed as if the woman had simply vanished into thin air. This story shook the entire community, as nothing like this had happened in the town for the past 17 years. But the strange disappearances didn't end there. Soon, other women went missing as well. The townspeople were in a panic. All the missing women had a similar appearance, the same build, the same hairstyle. People began to suspect that the killer could be one of them. Ladowicite is a tiny town located between Savannah and Fort Stewart in the state of Georgia. For the entire population, there is only one traffic light. No large enterprises or factories, all the residents know each other by sight. Anxiety gripped the townspeople on December 10, 2007, when it became known that a local woman had gone missing. The mobile home of Deborah Gail Moody was cordoned off with yellow police tape. The woman's car was parked on the street, while detectives thoroughly searched her home. However, they found no traces of a crime. The trailer was in perfect order. Gail seemed to have vanished into thin air. She left the house and disappeared. As the missing woman's mother, Melanie, said, she and her daughter spoke on the phone every day, and the morning of December 4th was no exception. The woman recalls how she last told Gail, "When you get home, be sure to call me back." Her daughter replied, "Okay," but never called. Gail was an introvert by nature and liked to live alone, away from people. She bought a mobile home and settled in it on a plot of land belonging to her uncle Randy, who owned a large amount of property. On December 4th, a worried Melanie contacted her brother and asked him to check on Gail, just to make sure she was okay and didn't need anything. However, Randy found nothing suspicious either in the house or on the surrounding property. That's when Gail's family sensed something was wrong. Friends of the missing woman said that she really enjoyed living in the countryside alone with nature. But this very circumstance played against her. As the detectives noted, if Gail had neighbors, they could have shed light on her disappearance. The woman's relatives were perplexed and confused, but many were inclined to believe that Gail had been abducted. Gail grew up on a farm in Georgia and had loved horses since childhood. She had an older brother, Jeffrey, who was only a year and a month older than her. They were inseparable, like twins. Gail could be incredibly sweet and charming when she wanted to be, but she could be fussy if something wasn't convenient for her. However, according to her mother, overall, her daughter grew up to be a very good girl. Even as an adult, Gail didn't cause Melanie any trouble. She was always ready to help, was sociable and kind. Gail was willing to do anything to support those close to her. At the time of her disappearance, Gail was 42 years old, and everyone knew her as a caring mother, even though her 23-year-old son Christian was attending college in Florida. Anyone who interacted with her described Gail as a wonderful mom. She just adored her boy. Mother and son could lie on the grass for hours, looking at the clouds in the sky and making up names for them. Gail didn't have a lot of money, but she spared nothing for Christian. There was a special bond between them. Gail took her son with her everywhere, never leaving him alone. So no one could believe that she would just disappear. Relatives hoped that Gail would return home safe and sound. Melanie and her grandson urgently flew in from Florida as soon as they were informed of Gail's disappearance on Monday, December 10th. The last time they had spoken with her on the phone was about 5 to 6 days before that. The missing woman's car was parked near her trailer, and a search of the home yielded no results. Ty Smith from the Long County Sheriff's Office said that Gail had been seen 5 days ago, after which she went missing. Initially, detectives suggested that the woman may have left the house with someone she knew. But while inspecting her neat and tidy home, one police officer noticed an odd detail. Gail's purse was lying in the house, and inside it were keys, credit cards, a cell phone, and cash. And at that moment, everyone present realized, the owner was not going to go anywhere, which meant that, most likely, something bad had happened. Apart from this detail, the police found nothing, no suspicious prints or physical evidence. Investigators had to question the missing woman's acquaintances again to find out where she might have gone. Officer Smith spoke with Gail's relatives. They all described her as a kind and wonderful person. The woman did not use or abuse alcohol. No one could even imagine that something bad could have happened to her. Later, the sheriff's deputies combed the farm around Gail's house, but found no clues. Ty Smith and his colleagues were extremely bewildered. They could not determine whether it was an ordinary robbery or if Gail had become someone's target, so they considered all possible versions. The longer the wait lasted, the more unbearable it became. The residents of Ludowisi were convinced that the woman had been abducted on purpose, and something terrible had clearly happened to her. When law enforcement officers reached a dead end, they turned to the Georgia Bureau of Investigation for help, hoping for their broader capabilities and resources. Several days had already passed since someone last saw Gail. Officers tried to establish what she was doing and with whom she was in contact in the last hours before her disappearance. Melanie, the mother of the missing Gail, said that the last time she spoke with her daughter was on the morning of December 14th. After that, Gail went to work. She was an employee at the office of a construction company located on the Fort Stewart military base. A police officer decided to go there and talk to the woman's boss. He inquired when he last saw Gail. Rick Dennis, the missing woman's supervisor, replied that he had not noticed anything unusual in her behavior that day, but he remembered one important detail. After work, Gail gave a ride home to one of her colleagues. She left with Gerald Branch. No one else saw her after that. 42-year-old Gerald Branch had befriended Gail when he first started working at the company. Co-workers claimed that the woman had occasionally given him rides before. But this time, things turned out differently. The day after Gail's disappearance, Gerald showed up at work, but she herself did not, although she was supposed to. The detectives wanted to talk to Branch. The boss informed them that he had fired him, but for what reason was unknown. However, he provided the investigators with Gerald's home address from his personnel file. The law enforcement officers went there, but the man was not found in the apartment. The woman who lived in the house said that he had packed his things and gone somewhere. The detectives immediately realized that they had to find this person by any means necessary and interrogate him. Gail's worried relatives wanted to find out at least something about her mysterious disappearance. Meanwhile, Detective Ty Smith suspected the involvement of the missing woman's colleague, Gerald Branch, with whom she was last seen. But he was hiding from the police. Then Smith asked Branch's boss to contact his subordinate and call him in to get paid. The man agreed to help. Yes, it was probably a trap, but the detectives simply had no other choice. When Gerald arrived, Smith immediately approached him and said that they needed to talk. And he replied, "Okay, I'll tell you everything, I have nothing to hide." Branch said that he had gone to visit his brother, and the detectives could not reach him because he had lost his cell phone. The man confirmed that Gail had dropped him off at home, but noted that it wasn't the first time she had done so. According to him, after dropping him off, the woman drove away, and he never saw her again. But Detective Smith did not believe this story. He suspected that Gerald was lying and keeping quiet about what he was really doing then. Smith got the impression that the interlocutor was trying to lead the investigation astray. He talked a lot, dropped the names of some outsiders. So the police decided to check the alibis of the people Branch mentioned. After releasing Gerald, Detective Smith returned to the department to find out if his alibi would be confirmed. But then Gail's friend Lynn Anderson called, and this conversation dispelled the investigators' suspicions. Lynn said that she had seen Gail on the evening of the same day that she had given her colleague a ride home. Then the women went to the store together to buy a dog crate. Her friend helped Gail load the purchase, after which they both went to the missing woman's house and carried the crate inside. Officers found out that Gail's colleague was not involved in her disappearance, as she was seen alive after she had dropped off Gerald. The detectives had to start the investigation from scratch. They decided to focus on a different aspect. As a rule, when investigating missing persons cases, police officers question those who were in the closest circle of the missing: relatives, friends, colleagues, neighbors. Gail's family gave the investigators the names of the people she had been communicating with recently. The woman had many close friends, including Lori Arrowwood and Shelley Lampkin. They often got together to cook dinner, visited each other, and went for walks. In conversations with Gail's friends, detectives learned some details of her unhappy marriage. Recently, the woman had been divorcing her husband and complained to her friends that he had treated her badly. Investigators found out that Jeff Moody was Gail's second husband. They got married in 2004, although they had known each other for many years before that. Jeff grew up next door to Gail, and their families knew each other well. At first, the couple lived in harmony, but then something went wrong. Unlike Gail, who already had an adult son, Jeff seemed to be unable to grow up. He had difficulty with household chores and work. His wife was forced to cook for her husband, clean the house, and drive his children to school. In addition, Gail worked, so she had to be everywhere on time. Instead of supporting his beloved, Jeff only oppressed her. In May 2006, burdened by problems, Gail moved out from her husband and filed for divorce. At that time, Jeff already had a new passion. Even before officially breaking off relations with his legal wife, he began to live with another woman. Gail was very offended by her husband because of this affair, and in a small town, rumors spread instantly. The detectives noticed another important detail. They found out that Gail had life insurance, where her husband was listed as the beneficiary. If the woman disappeared without a trace or something happened to her, this money could become a motive for committing a crime. Investigators tracked down Jeff Moody and interrogated him. They managed to find out where he was when he last spoke to Gail in person or corresponded with her, as well as when he last saw the woman. The suspect was thoroughly questioned. Despite the strained relationship with his wife, Jeff calmly answered all the questions and denied his involvement in her disappearance. The man served in the National Guard and, according to him, was at training camp when Gail went missing. The military unit confirmed that at the time of his wife's disappearance, Moody was indeed at the base. In the end, the investigation rejected the version of a financial motive, as the insurance payment was only some $200 to $300. Detective Smith had no more leads. Time passed, but the police did not abandon the search for Gail, combing the entire surrounding area. The further they advanced, the better they understood how remote this place was. The only dirt road, and on either side, only trees and thickets. The cops tried their best to find at least some trace of the missing woman, but to no avail. Then the State Air Patrol unit was called in to help. From a bird's-eye view, law enforcement officers carefully examined the entire territory that could be seen from Gail's trailer. With the onset of darkness, the aviation search team finished work for the day. They managed to survey an area of 800 hectares, and the remaining sections were planned to be combed the next day. The sheriff's deputies noted that usually in this area one can only meet hunters, and law enforcement officers had never had to work here before. They understood, if they stopped the search, they would find nothing. Therefore, the police were determined to make every effort and search every inch, because they believed that this would certainly yield results. Meanwhile, Gail's friends and relatives organized their own search. They posted ads on every pole, set up donation boxes and collected money for a reward for information. In addition, the missing woman's mother posted her daughter's photo on billboards throughout the county. Relatives asked everyone who had even the slightest information to report it to the police, because even a small detail could be useful for the investigation. The huge billboards featured photos of a smiling and full-of-life Gail, which could not leave anyone indifferent. Everyone had to think about how to help in the search. And people really wanted to help, because everyone in the town loved Gail. For several weeks, her family gathered every evening and lit candles in memory of the missing woman, and friends did not abandon unsuccessful attempts to find at least some trace. And already in January 2008, it became known about the disappearance of another woman in the state of Georgia, 24-year-old Meredith Emerson. This time, the police immediately had a prime suspect. Outside of Atlanta, law enforcement officers detained 61-year-old Gary Michael Hilton, who was considered to be involved in the girl's abduction. Emerson disappeared on January 1 while hiking in the mountains with her dog. As it turned out later, Hilton was a serial killer who attacked female tourists in Georgia, Florida and North Carolina. He hunted his victims in remote rural areas. It is noteworthy that Gail Moody also lived alone, many kilometers from the nearest neighbors. Her trailer was surrounded only by deserted fields. So the relatives of the missing Gail drew parallels between the circumstances of the disappearance of both women. In January 2008, a month after the disappearance of Deborah Gail Moody, Gary Hilton was charged with the abduction of Meredith Emerson in another county in Georgia. When the girl's body was found, the suspect confessed to her murder. Soon, investigators proved Hilton's involvement in other murders in Florida and North Carolina. All these crimes were united by one detail: the maniac attacked his victims in sparsely populated areas. And Gail Moody, as already noted, just lived in a similar wilderness. Therefore, the obvious conclusion suggested itself about Gary Hilton's connection with her disappearance. However, the police lacked evidence that would directly indicate the involvement of the serial killer in Gail's disappearance. There were not even hints or indirect evidence. So despite the seemingly obvious coincidences, neither the detectives nor the missing woman's relatives could do anything. Some time passed, but no specifics appeared in the Moody case. Gail was last seen in early December, and no signs of a struggle or crime were found in her home. It seemed that the woman had literally vanished into thin air. According to Detective Smith, the more time passed, the more difficult it was to understand what had really happened to Gail. The investigation had completely reached a dead end. The investigators did not give up, did not put the case aside, but they catastrophically lacked leads and important evidence. And then in August 2008, when 8 months had already passed since the moment of Gail's disappearance, Detective Smith was told shocking news. The office of the Liberty County Sheriff called the department. As an employee named Dante said, one of the prisoners there had valuable information in the Moody case. According to Dante, his former cellmate confessed that he had killed Gail. Allegedly, he was near her trailer, and then something happened, and the woman was already dead. The name of this prisoner is Marvin Javes. It turned out that Javes was an old acquaintance of the police and had a rich criminal past. He had been repeatedly detained for theft, drunk driving, possession and sale of. Marvin constantly ended up behind bars, but each time he was released early, and so on in a circle. However, despite frequent imprisonments, detectives were able to establish that on December 4, when Gail Moody disappeared, Javes was free. In addition, investigators found another connection between him and the missing woman. It turned out that Marvin worked as a plumber and was called several times to make repairs in Gail's trailer. Communication between detectives and Javes' acquaintances revealed other suspicious facts. It turns out that Marvin boasted to his friends about his involvement in Gail's disappearance. The guy said that he and killed her. His friends, in turn, passed on these confessions to others. Supposedly, Javes at a party boasted that he finished off Moody. So the police officers had to hear something like, "I kind of heard somewhere that Marvin confessed to everything," or, "I was visiting, and Marvin told everyone about it all the time." Sometimes Javes spoke in riddles. He would approach a woman and unambiguously hint, "If you don't obey me and don't go with me, then the same thing will happen to you as to the missing woman." The police only had these rumors and gossip from Marvin's acquaintances, but they all converged on one thing and were strikingly plausible. The cops had almost no doubt that it was Javes who was involved in Gail's disappearance. It seemed that this was the long-awaited breakthrough in the case, and law enforcement officers hoped to finally find out the circumstances of Gail Moody's disappearance. Detective Smith firmly decided to talk to Marvin in person by any means necessary. He invited the suspect for an interview at the department, and, surprisingly, he immediately agreed to come the next day. But Javes never showed up. Then Smith decided to meet with him at work. The policeman approached Marvin, introduced himself, and said that he would like to talk. The suspect got into Smith's official car, and he began to ask him questions. During the conversation, Marvin never looked the detective in the eye. He only gloomily looked at the floor and nervously tapped his foot. Smith had serious doubts about his words that he was barely acquainted with Gail. The experienced policeman understood that Javes was outright lying. Then he decided to put a little pressure on the interlocutor. However, he suddenly blurted out that he would say nothing more and told the cops to leave him alone. In response, the detective offered Marvin a deal: if he came to the department and agreed to take a polygraph test, they would no longer bother him. To Smith's surprise, the suspect unexpectedly agreed to come the next day. Marvin was scheduled for the appropriate procedure. He even informed where exactly to pick him up. But when the next morning he saw Detective Smith, he changed his mind. He stated that he was not going anywhere and was not going to take any test, after which he walked away. However, law enforcement officers did not give up. They once again made an appointment and again invited Marvin to take a lie detector test. This time he came as promised. However, according to the test results, experts could not definitively determine whether Javes was telling the truth. Later, investigators found out that the night before, Marvin had taken a sleeping pill, and this could well have affected the test results. A re-examination on the polygraph showed that Javes lied when answering one specific question. During the interrogation, he continued to convince two other agents of his non-involvement in Gail Moody's disappearance. Then law enforcement officers obtained permission to search his home. Forensic experts hoped to find evidence that would shed light on what happened to Gail. The basis for the search warrant was information that Marvin had videotaped intimacy with his partners without their knowledge or consent. The officers suggested that before the murder, Javes could have recorded intercourse with Gail, and this compromising video recording might still be stored somewhere in his home. Several police officers arrived at the scene and carefully inspected every corner, but found nothing important for the investigation. Interestingly, almost immediately after this, Marvin boasted to a friend, saying that the cops had found nothing in his house and would never find anything. Law enforcement officers were simply at a loss and did not know what to think. They continued the search, combing the entire area around Javes' house and neighboring plots, hoping to come across Gail's body or at least some evidence of the murder. The police managed to find out that the suspect had allegedly buried Moody under a concrete slab in his yard. To check this, they decided to scan the soil in that place using a ground-penetrating radar. This device is able to detect and record disturbances and changes in the structure of different soil layers and find hidden objects. However, a repeated search again yielded no results. Time inexorably passed, and the evidence base in the case was not replenished. The investigators' disappointment gradually changed to a real epiphany. It seemed that Marvin was simply lying. Javes was a local hooligan, and his confessions were nothing more than his own fabrications. Detectives concluded that the suspect's self-confident statements were just empty chatter. With his behavior, Marvin tried to create a reputation for himself as a desperate and ruthless criminal in order to please his own ego among local bandits and intimidate ordinary people. He hoped that after his publicized confessions, people would consider him a dangerous killer capable of taking a person's life. But in reality, the investigation had reached a dead end. But suddenly, on September 25, 2010, almost 3 years after the disappearance of Deborah Gail Moody, another tragedy occurred in the same county. 42-year-old Lori Arrowwood, the wife of a serviceman, disappeared without a trace from her home in Long County. The police could not find any trace that would explain her disappearance. The missing woman's daughter, Jessica, told law enforcement officers that she had seen her mother at home in the morning when she left for work. But when the girl returned around 6:30 in the evening, Lori was nowhere to be found, although her car remained parked near the house. Worried relatives immediately contacted the woman's husband, who was on a business trip in the Middle East. Upon learning of his wife's disappearance, Ethan Arrowwood urgently flew to the United States. He was in complete despair and admitted that he was most afraid of never seeing his beloved again. The official representative of the missing woman's 2 underage daughters told reporters that the girls were trying to hold on and asked all caring people to pray for their mother during these difficult times. The story of Lori Arrowwood's disappearance aroused significant public interest and raised many questions. Many immediately noticed the striking similarity of this case with the case of Gail Moody. The missing women were strikingly similar in appearance and lived near each other. Was it just a random coincidence of circumstances? What if there was some connection between these incidents? If so, it must be found. 3 years after the high-profile disappearance of Gail Moody in Georgia, another woman, Lori Arrowwood, disappeared without a trace in the same county. Journalists published her photographs on local news. Many viewers immediately noticed the striking similarity of the missing women. "She's the spitting image of Gail Moody," people were surprised. The women really were similar, as if they were sisters. Besides, both lived in the same area and disappeared under mysterious circumstances. It is unlikely that this can be considered an ordinary coincidence. But later it became known that Lori and Gail were connected by more than just an external resemblance and neighborhood. It turned out that they were friends, often saw each other, and went horseback riding together. Lori was a close friend of Gail's, and now she herself had disappeared. The people around could not believe the reality of what had happened. Law enforcement officials organized a large-scale search operation, combing the entire county in the hope of finding at least some trace of the missing woman. On the morning of Tuesday, September 28, just 3 days after Lori's disappearance, detectives visited the mutual friend of the 2 missing women, Shelley Lampkin. They planned to question her as part of the standard procedure for gathering information from the victim's immediate circle. Shelley, along with her husband Kenneth, who both worked at a correctional facility, lived in Ludowisi on the same street as Gail Moody. When agents arrived at the Lampkin couple's home, Kenneth was visibly nervous. And there were good reasons for that. Law enforcement officers found out that the man worked as a plumber and met with Lori on the day of her disappearance. The woman allegedly asked him to fix some malfunction at her home. Of course, such information immediately alarmed the police, who decided to take a closer look at Kenneth. His suspicious behavior and the fact that he met with the victim immediately before the disappearance gave good reason to suspect the man. Lampkin was taken to the sheriff's office for further interrogation. At the meeting with the investigators, Kenneth said that after completing the repair work at Lori's house, they got into his car together and got into an argument. Allegedly, the woman accused the man of her, after which he allegedly threw her out of the car. After the interrogation, Lampkin volunteered to take the operatives to the place where he left Lori 3 days ago. However, instead, the suspect brought the police to where he had buried the victim's body and confessed to the murder. The man described in detail how he strangled Arrowwood and then threw her out of the car. Despite a heartfelt confession to the murder of Lori, the investigators still had many questions for Kenneth. He was directly asked about his connection to the Gail Moody case. Law enforcement officials were confident that they were about to solve both crimes. The detectives hoped that Lampkin would tell them where he had hidden the body of the first victim, and the police would quickly find the mortal remains and close the case. However, the arrested man began to wriggle out again. He claimed that on the day of Gail's disappearance, he was ill and sat at home all day. His answer to this specific question completely baffled the investigators, because Moody's relatives reported her disappearance only a few days later. So no one knew for sure on what date the woman went missing. But Kenneth somehow confidently asserted that on this very day he suddenly fell ill and did not go to work. Eventually, the officers charged Lampkin with the premeditated murder of Lori Arrowwood, a friend of their family. The ruthless villain pretended to the last to be a grief-stricken friend and even offered to help in the search for the victim. It was hard for many to understand how one could feign concern and volunteer, knowing full well that they had taken a person's life. How cynical and heartless must one be to watch the suffering of grieving relatives, realizing that it was you who caused them this unspeakable pain. It just didn't make sense. No one could believe that Kenneth was capable of such atrocity. After Lampkin's arrest on suspicion of murdering Lori, detectives again focused on the earlier case of the disappearance of Gail Moody, his probable first victim. Investigators continued to question Kenneth about the nature of his relationship with this woman. The man admitted that they lived nearby and were friends, often riding horses together. However, the arrested man denied any involvement in her disappearance in every possible way. But no one believed these assurances anymore. Two similar women who lived in the same area disappeared under extremely suspicious circumstances. Both of them were acquainted with the same man, Kenneth Lampkin. Too many non-coincidental coincidences to consider him innocent in this case. After the discovery of Lori Arrowwood's body, the Milford law enforcement authorities did not abandon hope of finding Gail Moody. In search of traces of the crime or the location of the remains of the missing woman, the police carefully combed the surrounding area, involving specially trained dogs in the operation. According to the logic of the investigation, serial killers often hide the bodies of their victims near each other in order to have convenient access to the burial sites and visit there from time to time, recalling the atrocities committed. Despite a thorough search in every corner and ravine, no trace of Gail Moody was found. On August 19, 2013, Kenneth Lampkin officially pleaded guilty to the murder of Lori Arrowwood and was sentenced to life imprisonment. However, he never confessed to what happened to Gail Moody. Although all the evidence against Lampkin was circumstantial, investigators were able to establish that the missing woman was his neighbor and a close friend of the family. A year and a half had passed since the disappearance of Deborah Gail Moody, when the killer finally confessed to the crime committed. Police officers once again tried to get a confession from Kenneth Lampkin by offering him a deal. In exchange for information about Gail's fate, investigators guaranteed that the punishment would not be increased. After reading the document and looking at the officers, Lampkin said, "All right, I'm ready to tell the truth." Kenneth told about the events of that fatal day when Gail Moody disappeared. According to him, he visited his neighbor's house under the pretext of asking for advice about a Christmas present for his wife. But at some point, he was overcome by vile thoughts and desires. When asked by investigators about further actions, Kenneth admitted that he tried to rape Gail right in her home, but he failed. Then Lampkin resorted to another plan. Grabbing the woman, he shoved her into the trunk of his car and took her to his parents' house, who were not in the state at the time. There Kenneth tried to rape Gail again, but again he failed. Enraged by the victim's resistance, he strangled her, and then took the lifeless body to the forest and dumped it there. Despite all the efforts of the police, the remains of Gail Moody were never found. However, in his confession, Lampkin provided details known only to investigators and the killer, which removed the last doubts about his guilt. After this confession, the police, the residents of Milford, and Gail's relatives were finally able to find the long-awaited peace and justice. The most shocking global scandal of the year has been the revelations that many had suspected and some celebrities had hinted at in various ways. Why are medical IVs, kidnappings, fear, and even Justin Bieber involved? Finally, the famous rapper, producer, billionaire, and media mogul Puff Daddy has been officially arrested and charged with numerous crimes. This story contains such shocking theories and versions that will make you rethink your attitude towards Hollywood, show business, and certain celebrities. I can guarantee that. In this video, I will quickly and concisely tell you about the biggest scandal of the year, and possibly the decade, providing facts and the most interesting details. If you like this dynamic format, subscribe to the channel and support this video with your valuable like. And believe me, we won't waste time. It's going to be quite unpleasant. For many years, there have been rumors about the criminal activities of this rapper. Briefly about him, Sean Combs, also known as Diddy, Puff Daddy, or P. Diddy, is a 54-year-old hip-hop artist, entrepreneur, and producer. One of the two rappers whose fortune was estimated at $1 billion. The first was Jay-Z, who, by the way, is closely associated with Diddy. Diddy gained fame back in the 90s, always striving to be number one, to be in the spotlight, to bathe in luxury, and to control the fates of others, which is why he went into producing. In the 90s, he collaborated with rapper Notorious B.I.G., who, in turn, had a conflict with Tupac. Everyone probably knows the sad fate of Shakur. He was shot in Las Vegas. And all these years, rumors and speculations have multiplied that it was Sean Combs, aka Diddy, who ordered the murder of the rap legend. Even Eminem jokingly mentioned this in his track Kill Shot. And just imagine how dark Diddy's hidden side is if, immediately after this joke, in the same track, Eminem decided to apologize to him. In the 2000s, Diddy was already a superstar. He had hits, colossal wealth, a successful business, and a high-profile romance with Jennifer Lopez. But over the years, he increasingly faded into the background. He was talked about less and less as an artist, and more as a businessman and a person behind whose empire terrible things were happening. If all the accusations against the rapper are proven, he faces life imprisonment. Currently, he is under close supervision to prevent him from doing anything reckless. There is even information that he is suffering from severe paranoia and refuses to eat, fearing poisoning. But let's take things in order. Even before he was accused of organizing parties where, without exaggeration, real hell was happening, information about isolated cases of violence had already leaked to the media. Back in May, American singer Casey Ventura accused her former partner, i.e., Diddy, of abuse. She released shocking footage of him throwing her to the floor, grabbing her clothes, and brutally beating her. It is known that these events took place 8 years ago. Casey claims that the rapper got her hooked on alcohol and other substances, forced her to have sex with other men, and filmed it all on camera. The video with these shots is extremely unpleasant. And the fact that Diddy settled this case out of court the very next day after the lawsuit was filed says something. Why, if he's innocent? After this incident, an avalanche of other accusations poured in on the rapper. Back in the 90s, Diddy allegedly one woman, filmed it all, and then spread the footage on the internet. Another girl, who was only 17, was, according to witnesses, gang-raped by him and other men. The third victim was also intoxicated after drinking a glass of wine offered by Diddy, which seemed to contain something other than wine, because she immediately felt sick. All these horrific events, according to the victims, took place back in the 90s and early 2000s. And now we are gradually approaching today's events. I understand that for many, Diddy is associated with childhood, as he is for me. We all listened to his legendary track, Last Night, in a duet with Christina Aguilera. Today, the whole world is already talking about Diddy's mansion, where ruthless sex parties were held. The victims were brought to complete exhaustion there, forced to do things against their will for days. So it's not surprising that rooms were found in the house, equipped almost like a medical center. More than 1,000 bottles of baby oil and lube were also found there. And everyone who was seen at least once at the parties arranged by the rapper came under fire: Leonardo DiCaprio, Beyoncé and Jay-Z. There will be a separate story about them, Jennifer Lopez, and Justin Bieber. Let's immediately talk about the story with Bieber. In these shots, Bieber is only 14 years old, and in the video, Diddy tells how great they spent 2 days together, an adult man and a 14-year-old boy. In these shots, Justin looks clearly depressed. Everyone knows that over the years, Bieber developed quirks, addictions, and in general, his inner world cannot be called simple. But could this somehow be related to the rapper's parties? It's quite possible. For example, in those years, Bieber's career skyrocketed to incredible heights, but at the same time, in his songs, particularly in the track Lonely, he talked about paying a high price for fame. And everyone knows his story. Just from what is known to the world, his mother posted a video on YouTube, and he became popular. But what was really behind it all? If you believe his only biography, videos began to be uploaded to YouTube, popularity found him, producers noticed him, and now he's already a star. What price for fame is he talking about then? Interesting. It will become clear now. And what meaning does the clip, "Yummy," have now, in which adult men of not very attractive appearance devour desserts? Doesn't it suggest an analogy that at the end, this dessert for the producers will turn out to be a small, pretty Bieber, who, by some coincidence, will become a world star in a year? But the boy will indeed simply be released into the world with a series of brilliant pop tracks one after another, and he will find himself at the same event with Obama himself. As you know, the dress code at Diddy's parties required all white attire. And at the end of the video, Bieber dances with adults dressed in white. Many also notice tears in the eyes of the young musician, not in the video itself, but in the backstage footage. And everything looks extremely suspicious here. Such a meteoric rise of Bieber, his incredible fear of saying even a word to the rapper. And in general, such attention from a 40-year-old man to a boy. The death of a famous singer also seems very suspicious in this story. In 1999, a fairly popular R&B singer was Aaliyah, who was then dating rapper Jay-Z. It was with her that they began to compare the young and promising Beyoncé, who would later become Jay-Z's wife. Aaliyah died in a plane crash in 2001, and rumors immediately spread that it was a planned operation by Jay-Z and Diddy, two friends, to clear the way for Beyoncé and make her famous. And allegedly Beyoncé knew about all this. Now, Jay-Z's track, Allure, Karma, released 10 years ago, is being actively discussed, where the chorus and title are very consonant with Beyoncé's last name. In translation, it means, she knows, and Beyoncé's last name is Knowles. The spelling is different, but it sounds almost the same. In this track, Jay-Z says the phrase, "Rest in peace, Aaliyah," and after that, "She knows" follows, which echoes with "She knows," with Beyoncé's last name. Today, there is no longer any doubt that Jay-Z was hinting at this and, in fact, had already openly said that Beyoncé was aware of this whole case. The most popular comments in America under this video are just about the same thing, that Jay-Z knew everything, and people are only finding out now. The death of Michael Jackson, with whom Diddy was close, is also being discussed. The king of pop was often associated with children in a scandalous context. Someone believes it, someone doesn't, but now his death looks even more mysterious. Maybe he knew something and was going to or wanted to talk about it. Revelations of Michael Jackson are actively discussed online, in which he tells an unknown interlocutor that he will soon be eliminated, but we cannot say with complete certainty that this conversation really took place. However, those who believe in the mystical power of numbers will be shocked by the following coincidence. In 2002, shortly after the tragic death of Aaliyah, singer Lisa Lopez, also known by the pseudonym Left Eye, gained significant popularity. She also suddenly dies in a car accident in Honduras, where she went to overcome her addictions. I want to draw your attention to the fact that in the aforementioned Jay-Z song, Allure, Karma, immediately after the words, "Rest in peace, Aaliyah," the rapper adds, "Michael Jackson and Left Eye," referring to Lisa Lopez. It seems that he is drawing parallels between these three deaths. And here's what's interesting, Aaliyah, Michael Jackson, and Lisa Lopez, they all passed away on the 25th, while Jay-Z, Beyoncé, and Diddy were born on the 4th. Interpret these facts as you wish. Kanye West's eccentric antics and performances often became the object of ridicule, but now everyone has abruptly fallen silent and is saying, "It looks like we finally understood what he was hinting at." Perhaps this is what his scandalous 2016 video, Famous, is about. It depicts the aftermath of an that is, those infamous, white parties, and its participants bear a striking resemblance to Taylor Swift, Chris Brown, Kim Kardashian, and Trump. By the way, the latter admitted in an interview that he considers Diddy, on the whole, a good guy. Now the conflict between Kanye West and Taylor Swift is seen in a completely different light. Recall that in 2009, during the MTV Awards ceremony, Kanye rushed onto the stage, interrupted Taylor, and harshly criticized her. After this incident, a confrontation between the artists lasted for years. Allegedly because of West's confession, radio stations began to refuse to cooperate with him. But think about it, why on earth would radio stations care about this conflict? It is quite likely that the corresponding order came from someone at the top. They say, it's better not to deal with Kanye. Now there are assumptions that in fact, West was simply trying to protect Swift from the horrors hidden behind the scenes of show business, from Diddy's dark side. And he kind of predicted her future mega popularity and the fact that she would still appear in the famous video. But it seems he couldn't save her. In his latest album, which was released a few months ago, Eminem ingeniously veiled, and now openly hinted at Diddy's criminal machinations. Moreover, the true meaning of these lines from the track, Fuel, was only deciphered after the arrest of Sean Combs just last week. First, listen carefully. I understand that it may be difficult to comprehend right away. Let me explain. If you swap the letters SA, then this abbreviation used by Eminem is deciphered as assault. At the same time, the rapper pronounces the word rapper letter by letter, deliberately omitting the letter P. And then he adds, oh, I left out one P, didn't I? But without this letter, the word rapper turns into that is. The phrase left the P out, didn't he, sounds in English. If you say it quickly, you can hear P. Diddy. That is, Eminem seems to replace rapper with mentioning Diddy's name. Now this hint is more than obvious because it's not the first time Eminem has played with Diddy's criminal past in his tracks. I hope my explanation was clear. Sean Combs was arrested on September 17 after 6 months of investigative actions. Law enforcement officials have already stated that he could not have acted alone. And it seems that he has already been released on bail, despite its insane amount, his luxurious mansion in Miami worth $50 million, the sale of a private jet, and the obligation not to contact the victims. More than 50 people have already testified in the case. Over the course of several decades, dozens of world celebrities have passed through Diddy's infamous parties, let's call them that. And as soon as the terrible details of these events became known, all these stars, DiCaprio, Usher, and many others, automatically fell into the list of suspects in the eyes of the public. And do you have any guesses about what was really going on in this hell? The parties were called and access to them was different, by status, desire, thickness of the wallet, and so on. Weapons were found in the house. As mentioned earlier, hundreds, if not thousands, of bottles of baby oil and lube were found there. What for is not hard to guess. Many medical drips, probably intended to bring victims to their senses after violence, alcohol, or executions. A lot of evidence from potential victims covering different time periods. From isolated incidents of rape to real human trafficking, the actual transformation of them into slaves. No official charges have been filed yet, but the amount of information about the abduction of children for the purpose of selling them for the terrible acts that took place in Diddy's mansion is increasing. We are not going into details yet, so as not to be unfounded. The Justin Bieber case is the most shocking. His joint video with Diddy in adulthood, a depressed state, crazy fame and, at the same time, addiction, and numerous victims just emphasized that it was Diddy who got them hooked on illegal substances, psychological problems, and now such obvious hints at those same horrific parties. The victims claim that all the horrors they had to endure were carefully recorded on video for the purpose of subsequent blackmail. It's scary to even imagine what horrific footage these recordings might contain. It's real darkness and horror. But it's interesting that after participating in these someone's career could suddenly go up. There's something to think about, isn't there? Now it's hard to look at any pop star whose fame flared up in the late 2000s without a certain suspicion. And this is even without taking into account the shocking story of Justin Bieber. Even Taylor Swift, who is hinted at so much, suddenly became famous after a single hit recorded with the participation of Jay-Z, a rapper who decided to help the young performer. And we have already mentioned the connections of Jay-Z with Diddy earlier. Of course, he was also a regular at those infamous parties. Why did a world-famous billionaire rapper suddenly decide to take Rihanna under his wing? If all these accusations are slander, then why did Diddy try again and again to settle matters out of court? Why does he now want so much to break out from behind bars, sacrificing his most valuable property? Wouldn't it be easier to calmly wait for the trial and prove his innocence? Or maybe he still plans to pull some backstage tricks to hush up this case. It seems that he has already resorted to something similar before. Now we have practically no doubt that the mysterious hints from rappers are all about the same thing, the same gloomy movement that Diddy organized for years. Just imagine how great his influence must be if none of the famous people have yet dared to speak about it openly. Even Bieber, who has become a key figure in pop music, seems to be afraid to say something. Although there is another assumption, allegedly Bieber is currently cooperating with law enforcement agencies and will soon provide all the necessary evidence, but for now, he simply does not interfere with the course of the investigation. Support for Justin is raging online, all the comments are only about this, as if society no longer has any doubts about what ordeals he had to go through on the way to fame. But what's there Bieber? Have you ever seen Eminem, who buried entire rap careers with his devastating who always didn't care who to feud with, suddenly apologizing for some one line? He did it only once in his life, and of course, to Diddy. And here, no matter how you spin it, there can be no other explanation than fear. Even such large-scale personalities feel fright. At a minimum. We don't state this as a fact, but there are already active rumors circulating about the participation in those parties of even the mayor of New York. This is told by Diddy's former bodyguard, who now works in law enforcement. According to him, the rapper organized very wild parties in bathhouses. Honestly, I haven't seen any information regarding this connection, but even here I begin to see suspicious moments. Look, it's impossible to say for sure when Megan Fox started attending these parties and what role she could have played there. But, despite the absence of incredible talent, she also gained popularity in the late 2000s and early 2010s. Like it or not, she became a world star. And already having star status, she often visited Combs' parties. Megan Fox's young man in recent years is Machine Gun Kelly, a rapper who has always remained a niche performer and gathered small clouds. But around the time he got involved with Megan, he suddenly started playing stadium concerts. I really like his work in recent years, but this connection catches the eye. And you know what else happened in his career? Diddy became his producer. This does not necessarily mean that Machine Gun Kelly is somehow involved in the aforementioned parties, but all these facts are too intertwined with each other. In the West, an episode of The Simpsons is now being discussed extremely actively, in which exactly those infamous white parties of Diddy are shown. Crowds of people, all dressed in white, armed security, and in the midst of this is a woman who looks very much like Beyoncé. Just look for yourself. Either the creators of the animated series somehow incredibly predicted the future, or someone involved in creating the content of The Simpsons has connections with high-ranking individuals. You can't say otherwise. Diddy's unfathomable wealth is also troubling. After all, he was never a top rapper or businessman number one, but his lifestyle and influence indicate that he is one of the main figures in the industry. Why so? Is it all because of compromising material on influential people? Or because of the astronomical sums of money that he probably received by providing prohibited services to billionaires? Write in the comments if you believe that Diddy is really involved in all this. Or do you still think it's an exaggeration? And in general, are you now disappointed in Hollywood and the global show business? Or did you guess about this before? If you still have doubts, or someone will call me a conspiracy by the way, I never believed in various conspiracy theories, then just think about it. All these hints from influential persons, facts, allegories, testimonies of victims, and the constant adventures of wealthy, famous, and popular people in nice suits precisely to Diddy's mansion. This cannot in any way be a simple coincidence. Everything is too interconnected. Ask yourself, why would DiCaprio, Usher, or any other rapper, artist, or even politician dress in white again and again and visit Diddy to drink a glass of champagne? It's just stupid, especially after the discovery of thousands of bottles of baby oil and lube in his house. Seriously, if you believe in such accidents, then you, not me, are naive. I just don't think it's possible to attract so many people continuously for many years just for ordinary parties. Everyone around is hinting, but they are afraid to speak about it openly. It is quite likely that Diddy is not even the main one in this hierarchy. Perhaps there is someone higher than him, and he is only a key figure at this stage, and his influence is due to the influence of those who stand above him, a certain roof or something like that. But this is already from the realm of conspiracy theories. But it's hard to doubt what we see now, the arrest, the charges, the findings in his house. Think back to your teenage years, the rebellious spirit, the experimentation, those first steps into adult life. It's an integral part of growing up that everyone goes through. But sometimes, the adolescent period can become deadly, and not everyone survives it. In the lowland southern region of Oklahoma, USA, lies the small town of Waurika. This tiny community has a population of just 2,000, where everyone knows one another and life moves slowly and steadily. In the fall of 1996, one Waurika household was home to the rich family, Mother Gail, Father Dwayne, and their 4 children, 3 boys and a girl named Heather, who at the time of these events was a sophomore in high school. The heroine of this story was not only an excellent student but also a cheerleader. Heather had grown into a remarkably beautiful girl who drew attention wherever she went. She had a good nature but could also be quite fiery when it came to having fun. In her rebellious years, Heather wanted to try everything life had to offer. On the evening of October 2, 1996, an argument erupted between mother and daughter. The girl had racked up a phone bill of $300, which was a real blow to the family budget. The mother reproached Heather for her wastefulness, while the father was more restrained about the situation. The woman tried to explain to her daughter that she and her husband worked hard to earn money and couldn't afford to pay hundreds of dollars for phone calls every month. The thing was, at that time, the family was going through financial hardship. Heather's father, who worked as an electrician, had suffered severe burns during a transformer explosion. The man had nearly died and required prolonged treatment and skin grafts. He was unable to work and provide for the family, so his wife had to take on additional work to make ends meet. In this situation, every dollar earned counted, as expensive surgeries lay ahead for the father. The mother wanted to instill in her school-aged daughter a respect for money, for elders, and a desire to be self-sufficient. But the stubborn Heather wouldn't be persuaded, which again led to a serious argument. When things calmed down a bit, the girl was getting ready for bed. She went downstairs to her parents in the living room to say goodnight. After that, the daughter demonstratively, silently walked past her mother, showing her resentment. On this sad note, everyone went to their rooms. On the morning of October 3rd, the mother, as usual, woke everyone up for breakfast. But the daughter took a long time to respond. The woman chalked it up to yesterday's resentment and hoped that hunger would force Heather to come downstairs, but the girl stubbornly did not appear. When patience ran out, the mother went up to her daughter's room but was surprised to find it empty. In those days, cell phones were not yet widespread, so Heather didn't have one. The parents called all of the missing girl's friends, but none of them knew where Heather might be. Such behavior was totally unlike her. The girl did not suffer from mental disorders and had never run away from home before. Heather always took great care of herself and her appearance. She would never leave home for long without a change of clothes and makeup. But all her things were left at home. The worried parents wasted no time heading to the sheriff's office in Waurika and reported their school-aged daughter missing. Gail told the police officer about yesterday's argument with Heather. According to her, she was outraged by the sky-high phone bill, which significantly hit the modest family budget, and even more so by the teenager's stubbornness, who flatly refused to admit she was wrong. The daughter spent a lot of time talking on the phone with friends, which, in the parents' opinion, far exceeded all reasonable limits. And although the father was more lenient in this situation, he still supported his wife's position. The sheriff tried to reassure the agitated parents. He suggested that this was most likely an ordinary runaway situation for a rebellious teenager, especially after an argument with her mother. But Gail objected. Such behavior was totally uncharacteristic of Heather. She was not used to running away from problems but usually tried to find an acceptable solution for everyone, even after conflicts. Unfortunately, this time, the mother was perhaps too impulsive, and the daughter was not restrained enough and could not admit her guilt. However, the police assured that most such situations resolve themselves. Teenage runaways usually come to their senses and return home. It was quite possible that Heather might already be home while her parents were at the station. The officers tried to cheer up Gail and Dwayne, assuring them that everything would be all right. They explained that for a girl to be declared missing, at least a day had to pass since her disappearance. Of course, at that time, this condition had not yet been met, so the police could not yet accept the statement and sent the parents home to wait for news from Heather. The disappointed Gail and Dwayne felt that something was wrong here and were convinced that something bad had happened to their daughter. They decided to start the search on their own. First of all, the couple began questioning the girl's inner circle and contacted several of her friends. Among those Heather's parents spoke to was 17-year-old Randy Wood, the captain of the school football team. In the past, he had dated Heather, but their relationship quickly ended, and the young people decided to remain friends. By the way, it was with Randy that the girl had talked up a hefty phone bill. When the mother of the missing girl contacted the boy, he assured her that he had no idea of Heather's whereabouts or what might have happened to her. Although his words sounded convincing, the loving mother couldn't shake the feeling that the young man was hiding something. It seemed as if he was repeating a learned story like a robot. In addition, Randy didn't seem at all worried about the disappearance of his ex-girlfriend, which also alarmed the parents. However, it was not possible to expose the teenager in a lie, so Heather's mother decided to talk to another friend of hers, another 17-year-old high school student named Josh Bagwell. It was with him that the girl had recently started dating. When the woman called Josh, his grandmother answered the phone. She said the boy was resting after a party, and she didn't want to disturb him, to give him a chance to sleep it off. Therefore, the woman flatly refused to call her grandson to the phone. Josh's grandmother admitted that she was just cleaning up the trailer in their backyard where schoolchildren had partied the night before. When asked directly by the mother about the girl's disappearance, the elderly woman replied that she had not seen Heather. After that, the parents drove around the entire county in search of at least some clue as to their daughter's whereabouts. Unfortunately, their efforts were in vain, and a whole day passed. Then the couple went to the police station again, and this time law enforcement finally joined the search operation. A week had passed since Heather's disappearance, until October 10th, but still no valuable information about the girl could be obtained. Given how much time had passed, there was little hope of finding the schoolgirl alive. Meanwhile, police patrols combed the outskirts on the border with Texas, hoping to find a trace of the missing girl. And then, in the river area, people noticed a body floating face down from the bridge, half submerged in the murky water. It was noticeable that the skin of the corpse was covered in mud, and it seemed as if someone had done it on purpose. The police assumed that in this way, someone was trying to hide the body against the backdrop of the muddy river. When divers pulled the gruesome find ashore, something much more horrifying was revealed under the layer of dirt. The victim was disfigured beyond recognition. Her body was literally riddled with buckshot. It looked like she had been shot with a shotgun. In fact, the deceased was so disfigured that at first glance, nothing could be said for certain except her. A forensic examination was needed to establish her identity. In the end, experts were able to find out that the victim had been shot 9 times at close range, so the condition of the body was terrible, it was literally torn to pieces. One shot was to the back of the head, the other 8 to the back. At that time, Heather was the only person reported missing in the county, so her parents were called in for identification. They were able to identify their daughter by the ring on her finger. It was a name-engraved piece of jewelry given to her by her mother. This dispelled any doubts. The mutilated body on the autopsy table was Heather's. In addition, forensic experts found braces in the mouth of the deceased, which the girl wore to correct her bite. Dental records officially confirmed it was Heather Rich. The news of the death of the school cheerleader instantly spread through the town and by the next day had become the main topic of discussion. It took only a few hours for the entire population of the town to learn about the tragedy. On the same day, the terrible news was heard by Randy Wood, the football player who had recently dated Heather. This day was supposed to be special for him. It coincided with the annual game where Randy was once again to be chosen as the king of the game. It was expected that after the competition, the team would have a grand celebration, but now the boy was in no mood for fun. He was shocked by the news of his ex-girlfriend's death. Later, the young man even came to that fateful bridge and stared at the murky river waters for a long time. In fact, Randy knew a lot more than he had told the victim's parents. Soon the investigation led the police to the trail of this boy and several of his friends. This story was like the plot of a terrifying Hollywood thriller. One evening in the heart of a small Oklahoma town, 3 teenagers turned an ordinary night into a bloody revel. One was the son of wealthy parents, the second was the star and captain of the school football team, and the third was an aspiring street hooligan. As soon as the detectives took up the case, they first talked to the parents of the deceased. By that time, Heather's mother had already managed to call many of her daughter's friends and acquaintances. 2 young men fell under the woman's suspicion. The first was Randy Wood, Heather's ex-boyfriend, and the second was her current boyfriend, Josh Bagwell. The latter was supposedly sleeping off a party and didn't even call after learning of the girl's disappearance. Gail was convinced that these 2 were hiding something. It seemed as if the high school students were retelling the same learned story. Even the wording of individual phrases coincided, but the boys could not answer additional questions. For 2 teenagers, such behavior seemed strange. They were clearly too nervous when communicating and were reluctant to make contact, unlike other acquaintances of the victim who actively joined in the search for the missing girl. The mother felt that these 2 actually knew much more than they claimed in their telephone excuses. When talking to classmates and other friends of the deceased, the investigators received several signals that Josh and Randy were hiding something. The boys should have helped the police find out the circumstances of that fateful night when the schoolgirl ran away from home after an argument with her mother. Heather's closest friend said that the cheerleader was indeed going to a party that evening to see her boyfriend Josh. The girl was forbidden to leave the house late at night, but this did not stop the rebellious teenager. She waited for her parents to fall asleep, and around 11 p.m., she jumped out the window. There, the same suspicious pair of young men, both well known in the city and quite popular among their peers, were supposed to meet her. Josh was considered the son of wealthy parents, a rich man who always rode in the best cars and wore fashionable clothes. He loved to flaunt his family's wealth, confident that he would become their heir. The young man turned out to be a vivid representative of the golden youth, who cared only about his own popularity and money. In contrast to this boy, Randy Wood came from a simple family. But through tireless work and talent in sports, he managed to become no less popular than his wealthy friend. Randy was a handsome young man whom his friends simply adored for his virtuoso playing. He deservedly received the captain's armband and was truly considered the best player in the city and even became famous among school teams throughout the state. Randy and Josh were inseparable friends and usually spent weekends racing Josh's car on the dusty roads. Of course, girls often hung out in their company, and the young men constantly drank alcohol and sometimes smoked weed. There were few places for youth leisure and entertainment in the town, nothing much to do, so teenagers improvised as best they could. It is known that Heather Rich often joined their group. Her friend said that the girl also indulged in alcohol and weed, and on the night before her disappearance, she ran away precisely to hang out with the popular guys. This news shocked the parents of the young lady, who at 16 had embarked on such a slippery path. However, they were aware that their daughter was trying such things, albeit not in the company of young men. It turned out that back on September 27, 1996, 5 days before the cheerleader's disappearance, Heather herself and another girl from the support group were caught in the underside of the stadium. Grass and smoking paraphernalia were found on them. It also became known that the girl was drinking alcohol. As a result, she was suspended from school for 3 days. The parents were informed about the incident by the teachers. Of course, they did not hide their indignation, because they did not expect that their 16-year-old daughter would start such dangerous experiments. Heather admitted that she tried it out of curiosity and promised not to do it again. However, the parents were already more worried about why the girl had embarked on this wrong path at all. The attraction of the young straight-A student and athlete to alcohol and forbidden substances seemed frightening. The mother and father believed their daughter's assurances that she would stop doing it. But they never had a chance to verify whether she was telling the truth. Instead, bad habits could well have been directly related to her death. So the investigators turned to Josh and Randy, with whom the murdered schoolgirl was supposed to meet, hoping to find out the circumstances of the party on the eve of Heather's disappearance. The football team captain admitted that he and his friend had spent the entire evening in the trailer behind Josh's house, playing dominoes and drinking. However, both young men claimed that they had not encountered Heather that day. Interestingly, the police noticed the same nuance that alarmed the mother of the deceased. Both boys told exactly the same story, while speaking in an overly rehearsed manner, like robots, without any emotion, even though it was about the death of their mutual friend. All this made the cops suspect the young men of lying. The investigators suggested that the murder could have occurred out of jealousy when the teenagers did not share the girl among themselves. Of course, at that time, the detectives did not yet have irrefutable evidence that would link the suspicious young men to the crime. However, the high school students behaved extremely strangely, which aroused serious doubts among law enforcement about their non-involvement. Both young men became the main defendants in the case. It was necessary to check their biographies in more detail, their relationship with Heather, and the circumstances of the party arranged that fateful evening. The autopsy results gave completely new food for thought. First of all, the number of shots fired at the victim, namely 9. Even police shotguns usually hold only 8 rounds. Why reload the weapon to fire at least one more bullet when the person is obviously already dead? The second interesting nuance was the type of ammunition used against Heather. The killer loaded the gun with so-called Winchester buckshot, super-powerful cartridges whose lethal force was much greater than necessary for violence against a 16-year-old girl. However, in this case, this strange choice of the perpetrator allowed the cops to make the first significant discovery. Such cartridges were a real rarity, they were sold in only one store in town. The police checked the sales receipts and found out that shortly before the crime, the ammunition was purchased by only one person. The salesman looked at several photographs and recognized in one of them the young man whom the investigators suspected. It turned out that high school student Josh Bagwell had come into the store and bought a whole box of 20 rounds. According to the cashier, another man was with him. However, it was not his best friend Randy, but a certain Curtis Gamble, a person well known to the cops. Gamble turned out to be older than the other defendants in the case, he was already 19. Despite his young age, he had several arrests behind him. Curtis had spent most of his conscious life in various correctional facilities for juveniles. It is indicative that the guy was a completely inadequate character who was time and again caught behind the wheel while intoxicated. In addition, Gamble liked to shoot at dogs, horses, and even random passers-by with his gun. It was quite logical that Curtis became the main suspect in this case. After all, The other two boys, despite their strange behavior, had not previously had problems with the law and were generally not considered aggressive or dangerous individuals. On October 23, law enforcement officers visited the home of the juvenile offender in a neighboring town where he lived. But even more important, just a few kilometers from his house was the very bridge over the river under which Heather's body was found. The young man himself could not be found at home, but the police managed to talk to his grandmother. The woman willingly spoke about her grandson and, in particular, let slip that Curtis knew the area around the neighboring town very well, and was especially well oriented in the vicinity of the bridge near which the victim was found. It turned out that the grandmother had often taken little Gamble fishing in this very spot. So the suspect was much more closely connected with the crime scene than the cops had thought before talking to the old woman. The next day, the detectives were lucky enough to meet face-to-face with Curtis himself. The young man was detained and taken to the sheriff's office in Waurika. The interrogation lasted over 8 hours. Although the suspect said practically nothing to the investigators, he agreed to take a lie detector test. However, even this did not become the main value for the police. Most importantly, Gamble admitted that he had a rather rare Mossberg shotgun, whose peculiarity was a magazine for as many as 9 rounds. Thus, the detectives suggested that they had found the owner of the probable murder weapon. Recall that Heather was literally shot with a rare gun of this type. When the weapon was seized and a ballistic examination was conducted, experts confirmed that the schoolgirl had been shot with this shotgun. After presenting Curtis with evidence of his involvement in the cheerleader's murder, the young man broke down. He told the police that he had involved his friends Randy and Josh in the crime. Later, Gamble wrote a detailed 2-page confession. So, 3 weeks after the girl's disappearance, law enforcement finally detained a suspect who admitted to the crime. Given the probable involvement of 2 other young men in the murder, Randy and Josh were also arrested and taken to the police station. There, the high school students were shown Curtis's testimony. He claimed that he wanted to kill Heather and was the initiator of the attack, but not the perpetrator. According to the confessor, he handed the weapon to his friend Randy and forced him to shoot the defenseless girl. And Josh was allegedly just with them for company. Despite this testimony, the investigators did not trust Gamble's words too much about the role of the football team captain in the crime. After all, Randy did not really look like a typical criminal. The young man had not previously had problems with the law, was an exemplary student and a promising athlete, a popular guy about whom no one spoke badly. Given the locations of the events, the party took place in southern Oklahoma, and the murder site is already in Texas. It was in the latter state that the young men faced a trial for a crime punishable by execution. And this became a real problem at the stage of the investigation. After all, according to Texas laws, the perpetrator of the crime could receive the death penalty, so none of the suspects wanted to take the blame. Eventually, under pressure from the police, Randy started talking during the second interrogation. He denied his involvement in the murder and claimed that Curtis had fired the shot and initiated the reprisal, and Josh had helped him. Meanwhile, Bagwell himself refused to cooperate with the investigation. In October 1996, law enforcement had 2 confessions that largely contradicted each other. In the end, the detectives decided that Randy's words were closer to the truth, and he also successfully passed a polygraph test. But one thing was obvious: the exact chronology of events on that fateful evening of October 2nd could never be reconstructed with 100% certainty, but they decided to rely on Randy's version. According to his testimony, that day the captain was going to drink with his friends Curtis and Josh. When everyone gathered, it became known that Heather Rich was also going to join them. The girl knew Josh and Randy well, but had never crossed paths with Gamble before, so she had no idea how dangerous this guy was. When the whole company gathered and drank a lot, Heather found herself on the verge of unconsciousness, however, like the rest of the partygoers. In a drunken haze, Curtis decided to take advantage of the cheerleader's helpless state and decided to have sex with her. According to Randy, during the harassment, Heather woke up and screamed, pushing the away, after which she fainted again. Although the girl could barely move her tongue, it could not be ruled out that when she sobered up, she would remember everything in detail. Gamble knew well that carries a serious prison term, and he did not want to end up behind bars. Therefore, he suggested simply getting rid of Heather. At first, the younger teenagers took his words as a bad joke, but Curtis was not joking. He really took a shotgun out of the car and pointed it at all three of them. Josh and Randy knew exactly who they were dealing with, so they decided not to argue. The guys loaded the drunk girl into the trunk of Josh's pickup truck, after which they headed towards Gamble's house. But before reaching the place, Curtis ordered to turn to the very bridge near which the mutilated body would later be found. He ordered to stop the car in the middle of the bridge, drag the unconscious Heather out of the trunk and put her on the edge of the railing. The terrified young men feared for their lives, so they were forced to obey. They really unloaded the schoolgirl from the pickup truck, but the girl was so drunk that she could not stand on her feet. So the young men put her on the ground, and they themselves returned to the cab. They had no idea what would happen next. Curtis approached the helpless Heather and began shooting her point blank. Randy managed to see a gruesome hole form where the girl's skull had been. After that, the boy covered his eyes with his hands and no longer dared to look in that direction. Gamble emptied the entire magazine of the shotgun. Then Curtis, together with Josh, threw the mutilated corpse into the river, got into the car and drove away. They saw with their own eyes what had happened to the young cheerleader, how cruelly the mad shooter had mutilated her. Both scoundrels were horrified by what they had done, so they decided to keep silent, especially since they themselves were now involved in the crime. In October 1996, all three defendants in the case were charged with the abduction and murder of 16-year-old Heather Rich. Of all the suspects, Josh Bagwell gave the investigators the most trouble, because he refused to provide any testimony and there was practically no direct evidence against him. So the prosecution had to rely on the words of the other two participants in the events, which contradicted each other. In the absence of direct evidence, the position of the prosecutor's office was not too reliable. To somehow solve this problem, the state prosecutor decided to offer Randy Wood cooperation with the investigation. As part of the proposed deal, the football team captain was to testify against Josh Bagwell. In return, the prosecutor guaranteed life imprisonment with the possibility of parole after 30 years of serving the sentence. Randy without hesitation agreed to such an offer. In addition, the prosecution representatives discussed with Heather Rich's parents the possibility of a life sentence for Curtis Gamble as well. They expected only a truthful confession from him, which, in the opinion of the deceased's relatives, was of much greater value than the death penalty for the juvenile initiator of the crime. Above all, the Rich family wanted to know the whole truth about those terrible events. On October 15, Curtis agreed to cooperate with the investigation and pleaded guilty in exchange for life imprisonment without the right to early release. Despite this, during the trial, Gamble continued to behave defiantly and inadequately. An incident involving him even occurred in prison while the investigation was ongoing. Once Curtis attacked a guard, knocked him down and began to strangle him. The aggressive young man could only be pacified by the efforts of several police officers. In February 1998, almost a year and a half after Heather's death, the trial of Josh Bagwell began. The case caused an extraordinary public outcry, which is why the number of people wishing to be present at the hearings was simply crazy. In the end, ordinary observers, and even members of the press were forbidden to be in the courtroom. The lawyers tried in every possible way to justify the actions of the defendants in the case. In fact, the defenders sought to denigrate Heather herself, calling her an alcoholic and a promiscuous woman who herself had Curtis, and then allegedly began to threaten everyone, because of which the older young man had to take radical measures and get rid of the girl. The parents had to prove to the jury that their daughter was not the way the defendants tried to portray her. In fact, Heather was an excellent student, an athlete and an extremely decent girl who accidentally got into the wrong company and ran into a dangerous criminal. When Curtis Gamble was given the floor, he unexpectedly returned to his initial version of events. Now he claimed that Josh had not participated in the crime at all and did not even know about the planned murder. Instead, according to Curtis, it was Randy Wood who fired the fatal shot. These statements greatly affected the team captain. However, instead of remaining silent, Randy took a desperate step. Right in the middle of the hearing, he refused the deal with the prosecutor's office. The young man did not want his confession to be interpreted as forced and dictated solely by the desire to save his own skin. Accusing others directly in the courtroom, Randy stated that he sought only one thing: to restore justice for the innocently killed girl. His act contradicted even the advice of his own lawyer. After all, despite the nobility of motives, from now on Wood faced the death penalty. But this step shocked Heather's parents the most. They personally met with Randy after the court hearing to talk face to face. The young man's bold and principled decision was of great importance to the rich family. On February 10, Randy appeared before the jury and told his version of that fatal evening honestly and without embellishment. And the people in the hall believed him unconditionally. The football team captain described in detail the full participation of Josh Bagwell in the murder of Heather together with Curtis Gamble, as well as the role of his friend in the subsequent concealment of traces of the crime. On February 14, Curtis was found guilty of conspiracy to commit murder, as well as of committing premeditated murder. The court sentenced him to life imprisonment and an additional 99 years in prison. In May 1998, a public meeting of Heather's parents with Randy Wood took place, which was broadcast live. Despite the unbearable pain of losing their daughter, the rich couple was sincerely impressed by the honesty and sincere repentance of this young man. On August 7, 1998, the final court hearing in the case of Randy Wood took place. He was found guilty of murder and sentenced to life imprisonment with the right to parole after 40 years of serving his sentence. This decision saddened many caring people, because among all the defendants, it was this young man who alone publicly repented of what he had done. He consciously risked his own life for the sake of the triumph of truth. Many believe that Randy did not deserve such a severe sentence. As for 16-year-old Josh Bagwell, he was also found guilty and sent to prison for life, without any prospect of early release. Interestingly, the boy ended up in the same correctional institution where Curtis Gamble was to serve his sentence. In January 2002, both conspirators made a daring nighttime escape from prison and hid for 10 days in the vast expanses of Texas. A nationwide alert was announced in the state. But the criminals were not destined to enjoy their coveted freedom for long. They were soon caught and returned behind bars to serve their life sentences. This story, which at first glance may seem like an ordinary tragedy, actually happened to a person with a kind heart. The victim of a brutal killer was a caring, strong-spirited, and compassionate woman who worked at a veterinary clinic, a place where these qualities are extremely valuable. However, the circumstances of her death turned out to be highly mysterious, and the tangle of lies and falsehoods that the investigators had to unravel became an even greater surprise. The bright image of the doctor turned out to be far from flawless. Christina Parcel, a 40-year-old veterinarian, worked at a clinic located in the small town of Greer, South Carolina, with a population of about 35,000 people. Colleagues described her as an outstanding individual, the best specialist in her department, an experienced veterinarian capable of creating a calm atmosphere for any animal. Christina possessed a wonderful sense of humor, which helped smooth over even the most tense moments at work. Colleagues treated her with respect, and the management encouraged the talented specialist in every possible way. Christina had a young daughter, whom she raised together with the girl's father, John Mello, but only in the first years of the child's life. Friends and acquaintances unanimously claimed that the daughter was everything to the loving mother, but the child's biological father did not share this opinion. Soon after the birth of their daughter, the woman divorced her husband, and they had joint custody of the girl. Christina was engaged to a new lover named Bradley. Despite the apparent idyll, after the divorce from her ex-husband, the woman was involved in legal disputes over her daughter. Her ex-husband, John Mello, was a music producer who lived on the West Coast before moving to Greer. It is unknown under what circumstances they met and how long they dated before the birth of their daughter, but the confrontation between the parents over custody of the child was fierce. Back in 2016, on October 5, 2021, when the girl was visiting her father, he took her and flew to Italy. The mother was furious with this act and filed a complaint against him for violating the custody arrangement. This further aggravated the relationship between the former spouses. The woman even launched a campaign on the GoFundMe platform, collecting donations to pay for her lawyer's services. Many people sympathized with her and provided financial support. On October 13, 2021, Christina's fiancé, 65-year-old Bradley Post, called her in the morning, but she did not answer. After that, numerous attempts were made to contact her, but all of them proved futile. Then the man headed to Christina's house, knocked on the door, but no one opened it. Walking around the house, the fiancé went inside through the back door and saw a terrible picture. The woman's body, strewn with rose petals, was lying on the floor in the living room. His fiancée had become a victim of a brutal attack and showed no signs of life. Bradley immediately called the 911 emergency service, but it was too late to save Christina. Police found more than 30 stab wounds on her body, mostly in the head, face, and neck area. There was chaos all around, resembling a mess, but it did not match the typical picture of a robbery. Law enforcement officers found unusual items in the house associated with mystical practices. It seemed as if some madman had conducted a sacrificial ritual here. Therefore, the investigators began to consider the version of a ritual murder. During the inspection of the crime scene, forensic experts concluded that the woman was not killed in the place where the body was found. Throughout the house, traces of dragging were found, as well as signs that in some places the body was left and given various poses. This could have been done for photography or acts. After the body was dragged into the living room, it was covered with rose petals. Petals were also scattered in the places where the body was dragged. When information about the incident got into the press, journalists dubbed this crime the Rose Petal Murder. It is known by this name to this day. The police did not find any signs of breaking into the house. However, Bradley, who called the rescue service, told detectives that he entered through the back door, which always remained unlocked. Therefore, the criminal could easily get into the house the same way. However, this suggested that he may have been an acquaintance of the woman, since this information was not known to outsiders. Or he was just lucky to come across an unlocked door. At the crime scene, detectives found numerous signs of staging. This greatly complicated the investigation, as it was necessary to unravel a multitude of unrelated and contradictory evidence, discard the unnecessary, and get on the right track. Detectives had never encountered such confusing murder cases before and could not even decide which version to follow. However, investigators suggested that the murder was not accidental. The perpetrator purposefully came to Christina's house to commit this crime. Now the detectives had to find out what motive he had and who he was. Memory cards and a laptop were found in the house, standing in the living room next to the body. A transparent package with a potent banned substance was also found there, with small drops of dried blood on it. The victim's mobile phone was lying next to her body. In the hallway, a bag was found containing 2 white envelopes, each containing $500 in cash. A firearm was also found, hidden in a suitcase. It turned out to be a single-shot pistol for self-defense. In addition, numerous documents were found related to the custody court case over the daughter. Therefore, detectives considered the version of the ex-husband's involvement in the crime. Using luminol, a substance that allows detecting even the smallest traces of blood, forensic experts thoroughly examined the entire house. In several places, they found hundreds of miniature stains, indicating the extreme brutality of the attack. Before dying, the woman suffered a great loss of blood and unbearable pain. During this terrible massacre, she received 31 stab wounds. To find at least some clues, the police examined Christina's mobile phone. First of all, detectives sought to find out whether the victim's fiancé, who discovered the body, could be involved in the attack. To compare the information, investigators also took the man's mobile phone to analyze its contents. Bradley's behavior seemed suspicious to the police. The murdered woman's fiancé was extremely anxious, but it did not resemble the worries of a loving man who had lost his beloved. He was trembling, got confused in his testimony, and did not take off his gloves throughout the entire communication with the investigators. This only increased the suspicions of law enforcement officers, and, as it turned out later, not without reason. Analyzing the couple's gadgets, the police came across extremely provocative facts from Bradley's life, which immediately explained the reason for his nervousness. There were strong reasons to believe that the man used the woman's daughter to create explicit materials. In February and August, he made recordings and photographs in which the girl posed naked in various indecent poses. All this was found on the information carriers, phone, and laptop seized from the man for examination. However, it remained unclear whether this was done with Christina's consent or not. Doubts about this intensified when the police discovered new but alarming data. Studying the materials from the man's laptop and delving into the shocking details of Christina and Bradley's life, law enforcement officers found increasingly disgusting things. The focus was on a new category of victims, animals. Several recordings and photographs were found in which the partners had sex with animals, particularly with dogs. Amazingly, one of the best veterinarians at the clinic, who sometimes took animals home for temporary care, did this to engage in indecent acts with them. According to state law, such crimes are punishable by imprisonment for up to 5 years. In addition, the offender is obliged to pay a fine of at least $500, which can be increased at the court's discretion. Representatives of law enforcement agencies stated that these records are among the most disgusting materials they have ever had to see. All the discovered materials involving the daughter and dogs caused outrage among the public, who were shocked that a sweet, kind woman from a veterinary clinic suffered from such After discovering all these materials, Bradley Post was arrested. This happened on October 19, 2021, when he was charged with exploitation of a minor and distribution of relevant materials. As it turned out, he not only took photos and videos but also sold them. In addition, the police seriously considered the version of the fiancé's involvement in the death of his beloved, but he categorically denied his participation in this. Detectives had no evidence of his involvement in the murder. No traces of blood were found on his body or clothing, which would hardly be possible if he had inflicted such a number of knife wounds. Moreover, the woman's death occurred several hours before he entered the house, so the police doubted that he had anything to do with the murder. Apart from the ex-husband, there were no other suspects. In his favor was the main motive, custody of the daughter, which he did not want to share with Christina, which is quite often the reason for murder. However, at the time of the crime, he was with his daughter in Italy, and this information was easy to verify since he had not returned to the country. Nevertheless, John remained on the investigators' list as a person who could not be completely ruled out, because he could have acted through someone else's hands. The victim's ex-husband, John Mello, returned to the country on October 21, 2021, just a week after Christina's murder. Immediately after that, the police received a warrant for his detention. To pick up his things from the airport and buy certain medications that the man could not take due to the flight, he turned to his best friend, 29-year-old Zach Hughes, for help. This guy seemed suspicious to the detectives, so they began to study information about him in more detail. Zach was born and raised in the city of Morro Bay, California. A turning point for him came in 2005 when his parents decided to go on a trip for a vacation. After this trip across half the country, they adopted 5 children from Russia. All these children suffered from cruel treatment in their foster families, so they had physical and psychological traumas. The purpose of adopting the children was to instill moral values in Zach and his brother Eli, as well as to provide these 5 children with a safe environment of a loving, stable home. Their adaptation to the new living conditions was very difficult. It was also not easy for Zach and his brother Eli to establish communication with their new brothers and sisters. Because of these misunderstandings, conflicts constantly arose in the family. Zach's entire family worked on a farm, but the boy had a real talent. He was engaged in music. Therefore, his parents bought him a piano. He was indeed a master at playing the instrument, which was especially evident in high school. The teenager began to participate in music competitions and won first place at the Southeast Piano Festival. He achieved significant success, even performing a solo program with the South Carolina Philharmonic Orchestra. In 2010, Zach applied to the Juilliard School, which teaches piano at the highest level. The educational institution was located in New York. The boy was not only accepted there but was also immediately offered several degrees for his skill. With his ability, he surpassed all his classmates and became the only student from the USA chosen to participate in the International Music Festival in Kyoto. Besides him, only 11 people from all over the world took part in it. Those who knew Zach described him as a reliable friend with high moral principles and excellent communication skills. He perfectly fit the definition of a kind soul. The young man devoted his free time to supporting those in need, using his musical talent. He often gave free performances in rehabilitation centers, nursing homes, and hospitals to bring joy and comfort. By 2018, Zach entered East North Carolina University to obtain a master's degree in piano. During this period, he sought to help literally the whole world. Later, his desire was embodied in voluntary service in the U.S. Marine Corps. He applied to enter military educational institutions to become an officer. For a year, Zach mastered the intricacies of military service, but at the beginning of the second year of training, he suffered a fracture of both legs. Because of this injury, the young man was forced to interrupt his studies and give up obtaining an officer's rank. It was at this time that a woman contacted Zach, looking for a talented pianist for a church in the city of Greer, South Carolina. He agreed and immediately moved there, staying to perform on a permanent basis. As a reward for his work, the musician received half of the donations that parishioners brought to the church. At first, it was good money, but by mid-2020, due to the pandemic, the number of church visitors sharply decreased. The brilliant musician was forced to look for new sources of income. So he began to give solo performances in various locations of the city and state, as well as moonlighting in other ways. In addition, the pianist started his own blog, where he shared valuable piano lessons. For performances, he purchased the necessary electrical equipment, which provided him with the required mobility. Living and working in South Carolina, the talented musician met John Mello, the deceased's ex-husband, who had previously worked as a music producer. They quickly became friends. John helped him with performances and offered him a part-time job during the most difficult period of Zach's life. From mid-2020 to 2021, Zach helped him with household chores at home, actually performing the role of a domestic worker. This strengthened their friendship, and the musician became John's closest friend. Zach even became the only person John wished to see while in custody. Therefore, the police had many questions for the young man regarding his possible involvement in the murder of Christina Parcel. Could John have asked him for such a favor? Meanwhile, investigators examined surveillance camera footage that was found near the victim's home. In a neighboring house, there was a camera in the peephole of the door, thanks to which detectives were able to track all the events that took place outside the victim's house. On the day of her murder, the camera recorded a stranger dressed in dark clothes, with a hood hiding his face. He entered Christina's house around 10 a.m., and a few hours after the woman's arrival, the mysterious man left on a bicycle. This time his face on the recording was hidden by a mask. The deceased did not leave the house anymore, and no one came to her until the next day when the fiancé found Christina lifeless. This made it possible to finally exclude Bradley from the list of suspects in this case, although he still remained behind bars on other charges. Investigators suggested that it was this stranger in dark clothes, captured by the camera, who was the killer, but it was impossible to establish his identity. The face was covered, and no special signs were visible on the body. Then they requested recordings from surveillance cameras located along the path of the bicycle to track the suspect's further movements and began to study these recordings. This took a long time but yielded results. The bicycle was spotted in several recordings, including the moment when the stranger in black clothes was loading it into the back of his pickup truck. Due to the graininess of the image, the car's number could not be clearly seen, but the model, make, and color matched Zach's car. It seemed that the piano master was involved in the brutal massacre of the woman from the veterinary clinic. The police obtained a search warrant for the house where Zach lived. There, they indeed managed to find a bicycle identical to the one used by the perpetrator in dark clothing. Law enforcement officers seized the man's computer for inspection. With its help, it was established that there was active correspondence between John and Zach. In total, the police found over 1,700 text messages, most of which turned out to be encrypted. The men communicated, clearly encoding important information. In addition, some messages were generally a chaotic set of words. This was probably done on purpose to confuse the police if they suddenly got on their trail. In these messages, detectives found the following clues. On April 17, 2021, just 6 months before Christina's death, John asked Zach to follow his ex-wife. This message was not yet encrypted. And on the very day of the murder, John asked his friend how the musical performance went. To which he replied that everything was great. It seemed like an innocent question. However, the police found out that Zach did not perform anywhere that day. Therefore, they suggested that by performance John meant the murder of his ex-wife. As it turned out, all potentially important information on the young man's phone was encrypted or destroyed. In addition, he used an access code that was unknown to the police. This significantly complicated and prolonged the search for information. Moreover, it was not possible to obtain data on the location of the device at the time of the attack on Christina. The means of communication was constantly in airplane mode, including the period and the mysterious man in the mask came to Christina. It seemed that this was done on purpose to make it impossible to track Zach and link him to the crime scene. Despite this, based on the collected evidence, the officers obtained an arrest warrant for the young man. While law enforcement officials were working on bringing charges, Zach was invited on an international cruise to perform. So at the time of receiving the warrant, he was already in Europe. Detectives had to wait, but fortunately, by the time the charges were brought, Zach had already arrived in Michigan, not even suspecting that they were planning to arrest him. At that moment, the young man had every opportunity to easily leave the country. It was enough to cross the border with Canada or take the nearest flight and go on a ship on a cruise. However, as soon as Zach learned about the charges against him, he himself returned to South Carolina and surrendered to the police, as he was convinced of his innocence. This happened on November 3, 2021. The man hired a lawyer and stated his intention to challenge the slander that tarnishes his good name, because he did not commit anything illegal. However, Zach did not provide the police with access to his phone, so a petition was filed with the court. After that, an order for full access to the mobile phone was issued by a court order. The musician provided incorrect passwords several times, which only slowed down the investigation and significantly prolonged it. Finally, on April 8, 2023, after approximately 700,000 attempts, the smartphone was successfully unlocked. The police found important sources of information with correspondence between John and Zach about their encrypted plans to murder Christina. These correspondences were also planned to be used as evidence in the trial. But all this was indirect evidence that did not guarantee the outcome of the case. After all, Zach and John had an absolutely impeccable reputation, which could be confirmed by numerous witnesses. Previously, they had no criminal history, and the jury might not believe the correspondence and footage from cameras with a similar car. Stronger evidence was needed for a conviction, and it appeared. A forensic examination made it possible to detect the criminal's DNA under Christina's nails, which coincided with the DNA samples of the piano master. As a result, the police could confidently assert that it was Zach who attacked Christina in her home and brutally killed her. The defense, however, insisted that it was impossible to see the criminal's face on the surveillance camera recordings, and also to accurately identify the car. Therefore, the evidence was called indirect. As expected, the defenders emphasized that the musician had no problems with the law before. All acquaintances and friends spoke of him as a very kind person who was clearly not capable of committing a brutal bloody crime. Moreover, there was no obvious motive for attacking a woman. And the results of the DNA examination were not recognized by the lawyers at all, believing that the samples were either spoiled or falsified. In fact, from the very beginning of the process, when the general public learned that a famous musician could be imprisoned, dozens of letters from outraged people began to arrive at the court. Among them were former classmates and teachers of Zach, friends, and just ordinary citizens who did not even really know him but admired the pianist's talent. Among those who applied were also numerous employers of the young man from all over the world who were delighted with his skill. They all unanimously claimed that such a talented musician with a kind soul could not be a killer. The court received over 50 such letters. One interesting circumstance that indicated a rather close connection with John was a photograph of Zach. Oddly enough, finding himself in a prison cell, the ex-husband did not put a photo of his daughter or anyone else on the wall. He hung only one single photograph of the pianist. This looked very unusual. Lawyers emphasized that Zach never had even a hint of problems with the law. He served in the U.S. Army, where he went as a volunteer, and not as an ordinary soldier, but entered an educational institution to obtain an officer's rank. It was also used the fact that the young man had the opportunity to avoid any problems with the law by simply going on a cruise liner again, where he was invited. However, he voluntarily returned to his state and surrendered to the police as soon as he learned about the claims from the authorities. He knew about everything, including the warrants that the police were going to get to analyze the information. But this did not stop him because he knew about his innocence. The lawyer considered this the main proof of his innocence. Zach asked to release him on bail of $100,000. He wanted to be under house arrest in order to stay with his parents before the trial, in a calm atmosphere where he could play his favorite musical instrument. The pianist also agreed to avoid any contact with the family of the criminal and the victim. However, the court denied him bail, after which the musician was transferred to prison. He is awaiting trial behind bars, which is scheduled for 2024. The man still does not admit his guilt in the death of Christina Parcel. Meanwhile, John also rejects all accusations. Communicating with investigators, the man explained his decision to flee with his daughter. John reported that he took her to Italy because he was tired of litigation with his ex-wife. And most importantly, he was shocked when he learned about how his ex-wife Christina used their 9-year-old daughter to satisfy some indecent desires. Evidence emerged that Christina was also involved in this, as she was recorded in some photos with her daughter. Therefore, according to him, John took his daughter away from his inadequate wife. The man planned to gain custody of his daughter based on the explicit photos taken by the deceased's fiancée. And he had every chance of this. Christina could have completely lost custody. In that case, he had no motive or need to kill her. Nevertheless, John repeatedly expressed the opinion that he would fight for his daughter to the end, no matter what it cost him. However, he did not comment in any way on the connection with the talented musician. The prosecution believes that Zach is definitely involved because his DNA remained under the victim's nails when she resisted. Therefore, the pianist could be a participant in the conspiracy or a victim of John's manipulations. But there is another assumption: this crime, with the participation of a talented pianist, could have been committed because of his innate sense of justice, and John might not have known about the murder at all. Although their correspondence raises great doubts about this. In any case, the prosecutors will have to work a lot more, since the accused is indeed a law-abiding member of society, and dozens of people express support for him. Many new details are expected to be gleaned from Zach's mobile phone or from other sources, as the collection of evidence continues. But all this will be announced in 2024. I look forward to hearing your thoughts in the comments. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and hit the like button. Until next time, friends.